Rednecks have wise old saying, too. You don't lend O'Rourke the money, he loses his saloon.
F Troop was doing great in the ratings. Better than Star Trek. Better than Gilligan's Island. Larry Storch had even earned an Emmy nomination as Corporal Agarn. Then the fax machine beeped. Larry read the message and exploded with rage. How could they cancel it? The show was winning its time slot. But Warner Brothers had new owners who didn't care about success. Here's what really happened behind the scenes. Larry Storch was born on January 8, 1923, in New York City. But even the exact place of his birth is debated. Some say the Bronx, others say Manhattan. His father drove a cab and worked as a broker. His mother juggled several jobs: telephone operator, jewelry store owner, and rooming house manager. They were a Jewish family just trying to survive. Their apartment was small, but for young Larry, it became his first stage. He would mimic voices and neighbors, making his relatives laugh. By the time he was 6, he could already do voices that sounded nothing like a kid. New York in the 1930s was full of life, accents, and characters. Larry soaked it all in. He'd study how Italian grocers spoke, how Russian tailors moved, and how Irish cops shouted on street corners. By age 12, he could mimic over 15 different accents. He practiced with every conversation he overheard. It wasn't just for fun. It became a tool, a skill, a survival strategy. By 14, he was performing impressions at community events. He had no idea this would be the start of a career that would last over 60 years. At DeWitt Clinton High School in the Bronx, Larry made a lifelong friend, Don Adams, who later starred in Get Smart. But school was hard, not because he couldn't keep up. He was sharp with words and languages. The problem was money. The Great Depression hit his family hard. In 1937, Larry dropped out. He once said, "My family needed money more than I needed algebra." That decision pushed him into showbiz earlier than most. In 1940, when he was 17, Larry got his first paying job in entertainment. He earned $12 a week performing 5-minute opening acts for band leader Al Donahue at a Brooklyn bandshell. The stage was near the ocean, and the wind often messed with his voice. So he leaned more into facial expressions and physical comedy. After shows, the band would take him out to diners, sharing stories about the business. Word started to spread. This kid could do any voice, anytime. By early 1941, Larry was getting gigs in small Manhattan clubs. He wasn't making much, but he was building something. Between 1940 and 1942, Larry grinded through New York's fading vaudeville scene. He played cheap theaters in Harlem for just $2 a night, doing 4 or 5 shows a day. The Catskills gave him better chances. He got a $27.50 per week slot at Grossinger's Resort. That's around $550 today. He performed between dinner courses, making Jewish vacationers howl with laughter. He learned how to handle rough crowds. Some nights were brutal, but he kept going. Just when his act was starting to take off, history stepped in. After Pearl Harbor, Larry joined the Navy. In 1942, Larry boarded the USS Proteus. It was a submarine tender, a 529-foot ship that worked behind the scenes, repairing submarines. One of his shipmates was Bernie Schwartz, who later became movie star Tony Curtis. They served together in the Pacific during the final years of the war. In 1945, both were in Tokyo Bay during Japan's surrender. They were there when World War II officially ended. Afterward, their ship helped disarm Japanese suicide subs and torpedo boats. The bond between Storch and Curtis was real. Years later, Larry would appear in 8 of Curtis's films. Then came the moment that changed everything. After the war, Larry was hitchhiking in his Navy uniform, trying to get back home. He figured people would stop for a sailor. One man did. It was Phil Harris, the famous band leader. Harris picked Larry up and was so entertained by his impressions that he turned the car around and took him straight to Hollywood. They ended up at Cyro's nightclub, where Lucille Ball was sitting in an empty room, listening to her husband Desi Arnaz rehearse. Harris nudged Larry to perform. He did impressions on the spot. Ball loved it. She told him to ditch the uniform, come back the next night in a suit, and open the show. Just like that, Larry was no longer a sailor. He was a professional comedian. In December 1945, Larry got a shot at national radio. The Kraft Music Hall needed a last-minute fill-in because Frank Morgan, the wizard from The Wizard of Oz, was sick. Larry stepped in. He did impressions of Jimmy Cagney, Wallace Beery, and even Frank Morgan himself. It was a risky move, but it worked. Audiences loved it. He stayed on the show until early 1946, getting more bookings and even performing at a dinner for President Truman that January. By 1949, television was taking over, and Larry knew he had to adapt. He got his break on Cavalcade of Stars as the summer host, while Jackie Gleason took time off. It was a big deal. Gleason was a giant, but Larry held his own. He introduced characters like Smiley Higgins and 10-year-old Victor, all performed with wild facial expressions. They called him rubber-faced, because he could twist his features in ways few comedians could. This wasn't just a guy who did voices. Larry was a full-body performer. Then, in 1953, CBS gave him his own show. The Larry Storch Show aired on Saturday nights in Jackie Gleason's usual time slot. It ran for 10 episodes. The writing team was solid. The orchestra was led by Ray Bloch, but the reviews were mixed. Variety called the sketches slow. Life magazine said he gave it everything he had. It didn't last beyond the summer, but it didn't matter. Larry had made his mark. In the late 1950s, Larry Storch was still a name people didn't always recognize, but that was quickly changing. A big turning point came when he appeared on The Phil Silvers Show. The year was 1958. This wasn't just any comedy. It was a giant. At its peak, 23 million people tuned in. That's the kind of reach that could make or break a career. And it did wonders for Storch. He played two different characters, a crying sailor and a wild beatnik. Both roles showed off something special, his incredible timing and his face, which could move from sad to silly in a second. He didn't just play funny, he became funny. The crying sailor character was so strong, it actually laid the groundwork for what would later become his most famous role. Corporal Agarn in F Troop, a character who cried just as easily. But before F Troop happened, another show gave Larry a major push. This time, it was Car 54, Where Are You?, which ran from 1961 to 1963. Larry played Charlie the Drunk, a regular in a world of wild New York cops. The show was created by Nat Hiken, the same mind behind Phil Silvers, so it's likely that connection helped Larry land the role. His character was sloppy, lovable, and always a bit lost, but Larry made him unforgettable. Even when he had just a few minutes on screen, he made them count. And that mattered. That kind of performance showed producers that Larry could take even a small role and make it huge. He worked with actors like Al Lewis, who would later become Grandpa on The Munsters. It was a gritty, funny, Bronx-based show, and Larry fit in like he was born for it. Then came 1963, and something totally different. Larry moved into the world of cartoons. On Tennessee Tuxedo and His Tales, he became the voice of Phineas J Whoopi, a nutty genius who helped solve problems with a magical chalkboard. Kids loved him. Adults laughed along. What most people didn't know was that Larry based the voice on Frank Morgan, the same actor who played the wizard in The Wizard of Oz. Larry kept it quiet at first. He just did the voice, and they hired him on the spot. His catchphrase, "Phineas J Whoopi, you're the greatest," became something millions of children repeated at home. The show even had an educational mission designed to answer questions and teach kids through cartoons. Larry made learning fun before that was even a thing on Saturday mornings. But Larry didn't stop there. In 1960, he took on a massive challenge, reviving one of the earliest cartoon characters ever made. Out of the Inkwell had introduced Coco the Clown back in 1918. Now, decades later, Larry brought him back to life. And not just Coco. He voiced every character in the new series, Coquette, Coconut, and the villain, Mean Mo. That's 4 characters, all Larry. The show ran for 105-minute episodes between 1960 and 1961, airing later in syndication. It was an important piece of animation history. Sadly, only 3 of those episodes still exist today. The rest are lost. But the voices, those were pure Storch. He didn't just voice characters, he gave them energy, personality, and a pulse. All this time, Larry kept popping up everywhere. He wasn't just doing a role here or there, he was everywhere. Between 1954 and 1964, he became one of the most booked guest stars on television. His resume from that era looks almost unreal. He appeared on The Alfred Hitchcock Hour, Gilligan's Island, I Dream of Jeannie, That Girl, Gomer Pyle, Get Smart, and many more. His IMDb credits eventually climbed to 249. That's not a career. That's an empire. He even had his own short-lived variety show in 1953, The Larry Storch Show, when Jackie Gleason handpicked him to fill in during the summer. It only lasted 10 episodes, but it featured stars like Cab Calloway and Janet Blair. Larry's Navy days even helped shape his path. While serving on the USS Proteus during World War II, he met Tony Curtis. That friendship led to film roles too. Between 1960 and 1964, he appeared in Who Was That Lady?, 40 Pounds of Trouble, Sex and the Single Girl, and Wild and Wonderful. He played everything from Russian spies to over-the-top goofballs. Casting directors knew, give Larry Storch 5 minutes, and he'll steal the scene. By the time 1964 ended, Larry wasn't just another funny face. He had become a trusted, go-to actor for anyone needing a character with life, spark, and emotion. Larry Storch was never meant to be a legend, but the moment he stepped into the dusty boots of Corporal Randolph Agarn on F Troop in 1965, something clicked. The character was supposed to be just a goofy sidekick. Instead, Larry turned him into one of the most unforgettable comic figures on television. Agarn wasn't smart. He took 6 years to make Corporal and spent 10 years in the cavalry, including 4 stuck at Fort Courage. But thanks to Larry's wild expressions, loud outbursts, and his signature nonsense scream, people couldn't stop watching. He'd slam his Confederate gray hat onto his own men, cry about imaginary illnesses, and collapse into his captain's arms, sobbing, "Oh, Captain!" One of the show's most quoted lines, "Agarn, I don't know why everyone says you're so dumb," landed perfectly every time because Larry knew how to make even an insult into comedy gold. In 1967, all that work earned him an Emmy nomination, proving he wasn't just a clown, he was a comic genius. A big part of that magic came from his chemistry with Forrest Tucker, who played Sergeant O'Rourke. Off-camera, they were close friends. On screen, they were con men in uniform. selling fake Native American souvenirs to clueless tourists through their shady O'Rourke enterprises. Where Tucker's big, tough presence grounded the operation, Larry's wild energy pushed it over the top. They weren't like other sitcom duos. They were a perfect mismatch that worked because of how real their friendship was. By 1986, Tucker, already 66, joked that his body felt like Methuselah's, but his 30-year bond with Larry was still going strong. Critics called them mirror images of avarice and opportunity, and more than 80% of reviewers praised their performances when the show launched. But Larry didn't stop at playing Agarn. He filled the show with a whole family of Agarns, each with their own ridiculous personality. In one episode, he played 5 different roles, switching from Mexican outlaw Pancho Agarnado to Southern gentleman Uncle Gaylord, and even to Pancho's sister, Carmen. He nailed every accent, French-Canadian, Russian, you name it, because he had years of nightclub experience and voice acting under his belt. Some people didn't even realize it was all him. His range turned what could have been a silly gag into one of the show's best tricks, and it gave the writers endless freedom to push boundaries. Behind the scenes, things weren't so easy. The first season had 34 episodes, all shot in black and white on a tight 1965 budget. They filmed at Warner Brothers, using practical effects, like the collapsing lookout tower that had to fall at just the right moment. The first dozen episodes were rocky, as the team struggled to blend Old West authenticity with over-the-top satire. But by episode 13, everything clicked. From that point on, they delivered hit after hit. Director Charles Rondo made sure the physical gags looked perfect, even without fancy effects. Unlike the silly slapstick of Gilligan's Island, F Troop leaned into smarter, riskier comedy. Critics started calling it a show that was ahead of its time. Still, F Troop had to fight for its spot. Critics loved it. More than 80% gave glowing reviews. But many assumed it struggled in the ratings. That wasn't true. During its first season, the show pulled a 20.4 rating and a 31.3 share, beating out NBC's Movies with 11 million households tuning in. It ranked 36th out of 108 primetime shows. Shows like That Girl ran for 5 seasons with worse ratings, but F Troop was misjudged. The problem? It didn't fit the era. Audiences in 1965 wanted safe sitcoms with magical gimmicks or heartwarming families. F Troop mocked American myths, and some viewers weren't ready for that. Even after ABC moved it to a better slot after Batman, and ratings only dipped slightly to 19.2, it still got the axe. Years later, reruns helped fans finally realize what they missed the first time around. In September 1966, the show got a color upgrade. It changed everything. The bright uniforms popped, the exaggerated makeup landed harder, and Larry's expressions became even more over the top. Now every eye roll, every slapstick stumble, every twitchy panic attack looked 10 times funnier. ABC moved the show to Thursday nights behind Batman, hoping the color and new time would boost it further. It worked for a while. Critics said shows like F Troop, I Dream of Jeannie, and Gilligan's Island all became funnier once the color made their visual gags hit harder. For Larry, it was the perfect stage. His rubber face and cartoonish movements felt made for it. Then came one of the strangest episodes ever aired. On February 9, 1967, F Troop introduced a fictional Beatles-style band called the Bedbugs. Agarn briefly quit the army to manage them. The twist? The band wasn't just actors. It was The Factory, a real Los Angeles band featuring guitarist Lowell George and drummer Richie Hayward, who would go on to start Little Feat. They performed Mr. Tambourine Man and Lemon Tree while Wrangler Jane, Melody Patterson, even sang too. The music wasn't the best compared to other shows, but it became a cult favorite for music fans who later realized the talent hidden in plain sight. Despite doing well, ranking 40th out of 113 shows in its second season, F Troop got shut down. Why? Money. Moving to color cost a lot, and Warner Brothers' new owners, 7 Arts, weren't happy. They thought the show was too expensive and took up too much space on the Warner Ranch. Even though it followed a strong show like Batman and faced little competition, the business side won out. Producer William Orr said executives just didn't want to pay for it anymore. So F Troop, like the Munsters and the Addams Family, ended too soon, just 65 episodes in. The end of F Troop wasn't just a cancellation, it was sabotage wrapped in corporate chaos. In late 1966, Jack Warner sold his controlling interest in Warner Brothers to 7 Arts Productions for a jaw-dropping $32 million. That deal didn't just change ownership, it pulled the rug out from under every TV show being filmed at the studio. By July 1967, Warner had resigned. The shakeup left productions in freefall. One of the first victims? F Troop. Forrest Tucker, one of the show's stars, later said point-blank that the sale destroyed F Troop. He believed the show would have survived if the merger hadn't happened. It wasn't just actor frustration talking. The numbers were there. F Troop had recently made the expensive switch to color, something networks only did when they believed a show had a future. But behind the scenes, Ben Calmanson, a top Warner Brothers executive who reportedly hated television, saw the merger as a chance to gut successful shows and cash in on syndication instead. In February 1967, hope briefly returned. A Boston Globe article on February 24th claimed that F Troop wasn't being canceled. It was just moving to Wednesdays at 8 p.m. For the cast and fans, that was a sign of life. No one could have predicted the betrayal coming. Just weeks earlier, on January 5th, 1967, the show had hit a 24.1 rating with From Karate with Love. That made it the highest-rated show of the night, even beating Bewitched's 22.9. And by February 23rd, another episode posted one of the show's top 3 ratings ever. At that point, F Troop had won its time slot 11 times that season and was outperforming Batman, which aired right before it. Then came the silence. No follow-up from the network, no renewal announcement, just a quiet cancellation that blindsided the cast. They thought they were prepping for a time change, not for goodbye. Larry Storch and his fellow actors were left stunned. Ratings were strong. Audience loyalty was clear. And yet, F Troop was dead. During the 1966-67 season, F Troop averaged a solid 19.2 rating with a 31.3 share, landing 39th out of 113 network shows. That wasn't just decent. It was better than cult favorites like Star Trek, Gilligan's Island, and Lost in Space. Gilligan's Island, for example, had only an 18.1 rating. Even so, ABC renewed 11 shows with worse numbers. The math didn't add up. It wasn't about popularity, it was about politics. As TV historian Hal Erickson later said, even if F Troop had cracked the top 10, Calmanson would have killed it anyway. Ratings didn't matter to a man who never believed in TV in the first place. There was no proper send-off, just a quiet death. The cancellation came right after the Boston Globe misled everyone with that Wednesday Night Move story. For a show performing as well as it was, the cancellation made no sense, unless you were in the boardroom. Larry Storch never spoke in detail about his immediate reaction, but it was obvious he loved the role of Corporal Agarn. It was the part he would be remembered for, long after he passed away at age 99 in July 2022. He held on to that role for the rest of his life, never distancing himself from it, never pretending it didn't matter. It did. In fact, F Troop gave Storch one of ABC's few Emmy nominations in a year, where the network barely had anything in the top 30. That alone should have kept the show alive. But it didn't. After the show's abrupt end, Storch didn't disappear. He reinvented himself. By 1969, he was a top voice actor in animation. His skill with accents and characters made him a perfect fit for Saturday morning TV. He voiced characters for The Pink Panther Show, Tennessee Tuxedo and His Tales, and worked alongside legends like Mel Blanc and June Foray. He played everyone from Merlin the Magic Mouse to Cool Cat, and even gave life to a new version of Coco the Clown. He later joined the cast of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, starting in 1969. It was the start of a 4-decade run in animation. In 1975, Storch reunited with Forrest Tucker in a quirky CBS Kids show called The Ghostbusters. It only lasted 15 episodes, but it became a cult hit. The show featured Storch and Tucker as paranormal detectives solving goofy mysteries alongside a gorilla named Tracy. It spoofed Mission Impossible, and each episode included over-the-top monsters like Count Dracula and the Mummy. It was silly, it was strange, but it worked, and it brought the old F Troop chemistry back to life. When Columbia made their own Ghostbusters film in 1984, Filmation actually revived Storch's version as an animated series in 1986. That's how lasting the original was. Then came the big screen. In 1974, Storch landed a role in Airport 1975, the sequel to the blockbuster Airport. He played Glenn Purcell, a supporting character aboard a doomed Boeing 747. The film featured Charlton Heston, Karen Black, George Kennedy, and even Gloria Swanson in her final role. It became the 7th highest-grossing movie that year. Storch held his own in that heavyweight cast. It proved he could do more than comedy. He could carry dramatic tension, too. At 57, Larry Storch did something no one expected. He stepped away from his usual goofy characters and took a dark turn in a low-budget horror movie called Without Warning. It only cost $150,000 to make, and Storch played a clueless scoutmaster facing off against an alien. This wasn't just any sci-fi flick. It featured future stars like David Caruso and legendary actors Jack Palance and Martin Landau. The alien's terrifying look came from Rick Baker, the effects genius who made the head mask for $19,000, about 13% of the entire film's budget. They filmed it in the woods of California, and though the movie didn't blow up right away, it later became a cult classic. For Storch, it was a chance to prove he could do more than just make people laugh. Just a year later, in 1981, Storch found himself in the middle of Hollywood chaos with S.O.B., a dark comedy by Blake Edwards. This time, he played a wild spiritual guru named Professor Krishna Mansa Kasari. The movie had a huge $12 million budget and brought in $14.8 million at the box office. It featured stars like Julie Andrews, Robert Preston, and William Holden, who sadly passed away soon after filming. The whole movie was a jab at the movie business, full of twisted humor based on Edwards' real-life battles with studio bosses. Storch, once again, stood out. Even in a film packed with big names, his strange offbeat role left a mark. He was nearing 60, but clearly still in demand. Then came a huge moment on stage. In 1986, at 63, Storch joined the Broadway revival of Arsenic and Old Lace. It ran at the 46th Street Theater for over 220 shows. He played alongside greats like Gene Stapleton and Abe Vigoda, and when the show ended its New York run, he hit the road for a brutal 10-month tour across the country. By then, most of the original cast had dropped out, but Storch kept going strong. On tour, he shared the stage with Marion Ross from Happy Days and Gary Sandy from WKRP in Cincinnati. Audiences loved him, and his return to live theater showed he still had perfect comic timing and an unmatched presence, even after decades on screen. 14 years later, at 77, Storch was still going. This time, he played Chief Sitting Bull in the national tour of Annie Get Your Gun, starring Reba McEntire. It opened in July 2000 and ran until June 2001. His performance earned praise for being funny, without falling into stereotypes. Variety said he gave the character a clever twist, a knowing wink that made audiences laugh. The tour played in top venues, like Dallas's Music Hall and the SUNY Performing Arts Center in New York. And Storch, always humble, joked that when he was cast, all he really knew about horses was that they bite from both ends. Even with 8 shows a week, he kept up. Almost 80 years old, and still not slowing down. His final TV role came in 2010. He was 87 and appeared in a show called Medium Rare, playing a character named Willie. That marked the end of a television journey that started all the way back in the early 1950s. Over his long career, Storch appeared in more than 200 film and TV projects. From The Fall Guy to Married, with children, he never stopped working. And it all began in the 1930s, when a young kid in New York started doing voices and impressions to get by. He never even finished high school, but somehow he carved out one of the most unique careers in Hollywood history. Fans still remembered him as Corporal Agarn from F Troop, a role that got him an Emmy nomination and made him a household name. Even after his final screen appearance, he lived another 12 years, passing away on July 8, 2022, just 6 months before turning 100. His wife Norma had died back in 2003 after 42 years of marriage. Through all the laughs, all the roles, and all the years, Larry Storch proved that true talent doesn't fade. It just finds new ways to shine.